Well, before we begin, we will need to bring our meeting into order by doing a roll call. So, Christine, if you don't mind, please begin the roll call.
MK Sadiq,
Present.
Nikki Smith,
Present.
Kayla McCoy,
Present.
Connor Kerrigan,
Present.
Pam Hobart,
Ann Hobart is present.
Ann Hobart. I apologize. Thank you, Ann, and Pam Garvey.
Present.
Excellent.
You
Let
have
me
a quorum. Yep. Sorry, you have a quorum, so you may proceed.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Uh, we hadn't done this as a task force before. This is new. We are actually live streaming the interview process, and we are very appreciative of all of the candidates who are willing to join us in this space. We will have a 30-minute discussion with each candidate, and then afterwards I will ask all of the task force members to kind of jot down how they're scoring the candidate and then submit that to Christine and she'll do a quick tabulation. But in the meantime, we're just asking questions. We may not have enough time to do a follow-up question, but my hope is that we get through the questions and we want to allot maybe about 4 minutes or so for each person to ask their question and to get an answer. All right. So we'll begin. Again, I just want to say thank you for your time. This is always appreciated. So let's begin by asking a question about practice. Um, Tell us about your approach to drafting a poem, including your choice of form and how you know a poem is ready for an audience. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
My apologies. I said before we begin, may I have permission to speak?
Um,
Yes. And one more thing, I'd like to add to our roll call, if I may, and I will be quick. I understand and recognize and honor that we are here because of the work and life of others, and I would just like to call them into this space with us. Our former poet laureates who are no longer with us, Dr. Michael Castro, Dr. Shirley Bradley Price LaFleur, and our poet laureate who is still with us, Dr. Janie Iber, who we've all learned from and been in community with. Would also like to call our other poet laureates into the space, Dr. Maya Angelou and Gwendolyn Brooks, and also want to give a shout out to Dr. Eugene B. Redmond. We sat at their feet and now we stand on their shoulders, and now I'm about to answer your question. All right. My approach to constructing a poem. I will say that it depends what type of poem it is, what the purpose of the writing is. So for example, I am a narrative poet. I love telling stories. I use a lot of imagery and poetic device and adventurous language, no matter what form of poetry I'm writing. But if I'm writing, for an example, an occasional poem, like I just performed a couple days ago at CAM, the structure may begin with a theme or an idea of what is being addressed, why we are gathered. So to use that same example, we were talking about arts activism and really the contributions of the arts community into creating policy, right? And so for that poem, because I had the theme, then I started thinking about creative connections to what we're talking about, because policy can be boring, right? So what are the bright spots and the lights that I can add to this topic that could be kind of bland? And then I start thinking about form. Generally, I write in free verse. I can write in form. Free verse is where I'm the most comfortable because it's fluid. I like writing in different forms as exercises in brevity, in making sentences work harder and using less words. But when I'm writing something for the stage, it's just coming. It's just coming in free verse. And so so the construction is first theme and topic, connecting poetic device or creative elements to that theme, considering form if there's going to be a form. And then you got to ask your people. Some people call it workshopping, some people call it just getting a second opinion. I have some people in my life who I love very, very much, and they tell me the truth about my poems, which makes them better. And so I would say those are the general steps. Of course, it gets more specific depending on what the poem is. Did I answer all parts?
I think so. Thank you so much. Connor?
Yeah, thank you for being here. So obviously, the poet laureate becomes a public figure, someone who is responsible for a lot of the civic nature of the art form and integrating poetry as an art form into our civic life and using it to enhance our civic life in the city of St. Louis. So, were you to be selected, how would you plan to use your platform as the poet laureate to promote poetry and literature in the city of St. Louis? And how might that be something that would improve the reputation and well-being of our city and its residents?
Thank you for the question. So, because of the way that I work and move in community, particularly as it relates to creative output, whether it is in my own performance or commission work practice, or it is in my teaching artist practice, I already do that, right? I just don't have a title other than Miss or Mama Pasha. Um, so my approach would be just an amplification of what I'm already doing, um, which is to use the elements of convening, right? When we come together, whether it is to educate, whether it is to discuss, to plan, or to organize, using those as opportunities to propagate just what St. Louis poetry is, which is very, very rich, very, very storied. Our city's contributions to the great American poetic canon are innumerable. Even if you can't name a poet who comes from here, the poets you name have some kind of tie to here. Not just because of our location, but just because we have been at the confluence of so many different movements throughout the decades. As I understand it, and my experience in being the curation assistant for Dr. Michael Castro during his tenure is that the poet laureate tends to give invocations. Um, I would say poetic blessings or poetic offerings before meetings. I also think, though, that the poet laureate, if I'm not mistaken, is the only position that the Board of Aldermen approves through an ordinance to be a representative for an art form. If there is another one, please correct me. And so there's also an opportunity to not just be a representative for poetry and literary arts, but for many different art forms within the city, because the poet now has a seat at these tables. So what does policy look like that helps to amplify poetry in St. Louis, whether it is funding for youth programs, whether it is um, uh, helping to facilitate gatherings for story sharing and history keeping, whether it is to um, help create digital archives and places where we can store and warehouse and keep the history as part of the city's history. And also, what does policy look like? It is very beautiful when people want poets to come and perform at their events. It's even better when you want us to come and be part of the conversation about how the money is spent, how the programs are organized, how uh, the grants are awarded. And so I know I've said a lot. Did I answer your question? Because I could keep going.
No, I think that was super helpful. I really appreciate it. Yeah, definitely. I think the next question will come from Anne.
That's right. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Connor. Ann?
Thanks, Connor. Thanks, MK. Hi, Paisha. This question is a little bit related to the one that Connor posed, but what is your vision for your term if selected as St. Louis Poet Laureate?
What is my vision? My vision is really wide and really expansive. I have so many ideas, but I think for purposes of brevity and clarity, I'm just going to talk about three of them. The first one is documentation and history keeping, also institution building. There are so many young people who would benefit from knowing how we got here. And a lot of the people who hold those stories are still with us. So, what does it mean to gather those stories, gather those histories and those experiences, and have a central place to store them so that they can be accessed? Some of us are fortunate enough to have sat at the feet of our poets who are no longer with us, and some of us have sat at the feet of the storytellers, the people who sat at those feet. Um, as part of my teaching artist practice, we always do a Kwan Saba. Because of the Kwan Saba, they are able to know who Dr. Eugene B. Redmond is, right? They're able to understand what a poet laureate is. And by extension, they're also able to understand the Nguzo Saba and all these different principles that we live to help forward humanity in a harmonious way. And so what does it mean to gather all of that, have a place where it can be stored and where it can be accessed and added to over the years? So maybe that's a digital archive, maybe that's a physical space, maybe it starts with interviews, maybe it's a website where we just share work. There's so many places that can go, and I would definitely lean on the knowledge of those in the room and the desires of the poets who are here. So we convene and we talk about and we discuss and we organize and we make it happen. The other thing is, I keep using the word convening, but I just like for us to get together. So convening and gathering. One of the things that I feel really blessed to have been a part of was almost 10 years ago, I was able to see parts of, I don't think I saw the whole thing, a Warrior Poets induction. I had been hearing about this thing for so many years, and all of the people who I loved and admired were warrior poets. And for those who are unfamiliar, the Warrior Poet Council is a council of poets who have, and if you are aware, please correct me if I'm wrong, who have, for at least 25 years minimum, propagated poetry at home and abroad in a way that amplifies the art form and celebrates um, the art form and its contribution to this city. Um, and so having things like the Warrior Poet Council come back, well, I won't say come back, it could probably still have not gone anywhere. Also thinking about our young people. I work with young people a lot. One of my favorite things to do is to tell the young people that if I'm in a residency and it's a one-off or I'm only there for 8 sessions or so, that poetry doesn't have to stop here. You know, you can keep writing. And if you have a desire to be published or to perform, there are other places you can go. Unfortunately, in St. Louis, for the young people, particularly teenagers, most of those things are seasonal, right? So we have Poetry Out Loud, which happens once a year, right? We have Verbquake, which is seasonal. We have Outside Lit Magazine, which is print, and that is really place-based. So if you're not at that school, then you can't really participate in that. And then we have teaching artists who go to different places, but they are not connected to a central source. And so our young people need places to go, to be, to convene, and that are led by them. I just got an email from Chuck Hasung from St. Louis University High. They started a poetry club, and he's like, they're so excited. Where are the open mics they can go to? Right. And so I think one of the responsibilities is not just to represent poetry, but also to create pathways so others can represent poetry for themselves, whether that is spoken, whether that is print, whether it is just getting together and writing for something that will never be shared. The Poet Laureate has a responsibility to foster those kind of connections and to provide avenues for people to share their work. And then the last one is I would say skill sharing, and I just said writers clubs, but also thinking about um, the craft. As we know in St. Louis, your definition of poetry can depend on what your experience is. You had a really great instructor in college, and so your idea of poetry is form, right? You love going to open mics and the energy and the dynamism and the back and forth and the call and response. So your idea of poetry is performance. Regardless of how it expresses itself, where are the skill sharing, skill building, and educational opportunities to perfect that? And so bringing us together through critique, through sharing, mentorship, all those things that connect us in community where we can make each other better in our craft. And then finally, under all of that, is that we do it together. We do it in community. So we're doing the documentation, we're doing the institution building, we're doing the convening, we're doing the skill sharing, all together, all in community, whether that is we are organized loosely or we have a council, a representative council. That remains to be seen. Again, I will look to the people for help with developing that. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Paisha.
Next, thank you. Please, Pam, proceed.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Paisha. Would you please tell us why your body of work makes you the best candidate for the Poet Laureate position?
Thank you for the question, Pam. Why my body of work makes me the best candidate. One thing that I really love about writing things that are intended to be shared, whether they are on the page or whether they are spoken, whether they are drawn, is challenging myself to write outside of the expectation, to make the work accessible. I use a lot of imagery. I use a lot of rhyme. I tend to, like I said earlier, be adventurous in my writing. Regardless if I'm using multi-syllabic words or if I'm trying to connect really expansive or so-called high-minded concepts to something creative, you have to be able to connect with it, whether you are in high school, whether you no matter what your age is, what your experience level with poetry is, I always seek to make sure that even if my poetry isn't for everybody, it's still for everybody. And so my body of work includes written work. It includes published and commissioned work. It touches on themes of social organization, of contemplation on purpose and practice. It is ancestor veneration. It is talking to the little child inside of us. It is response. It is reaction. It is observation. It is critique. So I think I'm answering your question in two parts. It's not just the body of work in the content, but it's also the body of work in the way that it is expressed. We say from the page to the stage. I'm on the page, I'm on the stage. I'm also in the sketchbook.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Thank you so much, Pam. Nick?
Yeah, thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. I just had you kind of answered this when you talked about your vision for your term, but what impact or outcomes do you envision your poetry and your outreach having on your audiences in St. Louis?
Hmm. Appreciating your question. If I understand it correctly, I would like my poetry and term to have the same outcome for um, humanity, and that is that we make each other better, that we are pushed and challenged to consider how our thoughts and our actions impact and contribute to the world, to this society. Um, to think about what our responsibility to each other is. And if we feel like we don't have a responsibility to each other, then maybe think about and explore why. To also help people to understand that poetry, you don't have to be a certain way to call yourself a poet. All right. You don't have to sit down and say, I'm going to write um, my 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 great life's work. Every time you write something, that is your great life's work. You do not have to be published. You do not have to be great at spoken word. You don't even have to share it. I want people to understand that poetry is just, as we say, the skillful and creative use of your imagination. That is the expression of everything beautiful and divine in the universe coming through you, through your creativity that you share with others. And so I really hope that if I'm selected, my desire is that people who don't feel like they have a connection to poetry will know that they have a connection to poetry, that their life is a poem, that the way they love is a poem, the way they treat and teach and raise their children is a poem. It is creativity in action. All you're doing with poetry is putting words to it. And
Thank you.
also, can I?
No, go ahead, go
One
ahead.
more thing. Also, I really want us to be together. I go to so many different types of poetry gatherings, whether they are considered readings, whether they considered shows or workshops, and you tend to see the same people in some of those same places. And a lot of times you don't see that crossover, people going to other places. So I've been to places and I think, oh, this person would love this. Oh, this person would love being here. Oh, I wonder if this person had this experience of being at this place, if it would help them with this thing. So, how can I bring all of us into all of those different spaces?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. And last but not least, Kaylin.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us today. Um, what do you think might be the biggest challenges and opportunities to your term as poet laureate?
Hmm. So, Miss Kaylin, I feel like I've talked about most of them, but to condense it, the challenges. Uh, I think perception of what poetry is, that the only people that engage with poetry are poets. So there's that, and you know, the fractured nature of the different poetry communities within the community. And so the challenge is, how do we just general en masse outside of people who already have their own definition of what poetry is? How do we bring those um, who may not think that they really know what it is? How do we bring them along? Um, and then also, how do we bring each other back and be connected? I hear stories from, you know, the days of Bag and Sudan illustrators and La Patisserie and Duff's and what did you what was it called? Wabash Triangle Cafe, right? I hear stories about how, you know, it was the poets and it was the musicians and it was this kind of poet and that kind of poet. How do we return to that? Right? That is a challenge. And how do we do it in real time in the real world? How do we be together? How when we can touch each other, because so much stuff is it happens through a screen. The third thing I'll say is funding, because as I understand it, there's not a budget for a stipend for the poet laureate to do all these things. So how do all these things get done in the absence of budgeted funding? Do we ask the community to fund these things? Or is this one of those tables that the poet laureate needs to be at to advocate so that money is in the budget, or that funding, or that resource? I won't even say money. What are the resources? And in the inverse, the challenges are opportunities, right? This is the opportunity to redefine and reintroduce what poetry is to people who are not connected to it. This is an opportunity for us to get together, right? This is the opportunity for us to change the way that policy not just treats poets, but all the artists, right? At the beginning, when we're thinking about these programs, when we're thinking about these ordinances, what are the resources that are also attached to it so that the people can do their work effectively? Did I answer you?
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you, Kaylin. Just a quick check-in, Christine, about how much time do we have left?
5 minutes and 45 seconds.
Perfect. All right. In the remaining time that we have, is there anything that you would like to add to what you've already said, Paisha? Anything else?
Yes. If I may, can I share a reading with you all? It's very short.
Sure.
So I would like to leave you with, there's a book called Run Towards Fear by Dr. Hakeem Madabuti. He is very well known, a pillar of the Black arts movement. He is founder of the famed Third World Press, and he has lots of relations here in St. Louis. This may even be considered his second home. I'm not putting words in his mouth. But in 2011, I had the occasion to meet him and interview him, and he gave me this book. And it's one of my favorite books because in the back, there is a handbook for poets, and it has 39 points. My favorite one is number 2. It says, think about, read, and study more poetry than you write. And I try to make that a practice. But what I want to leave you with is this. Poetry is the wellspring of tradition, the bleeding connector of yesterdays, and the free passport to futures. Poems bind people to language, link generations to each other, and introduces cultures to culture. Poetry, if given the eye and the ear, can bring memories, issue laughter, reign in beauty, and cure ignorance. Language in the context of the working poem can raise the mindset of entire civilizations, speak to 2-year-olds, and render some of us wise. To be touched by living poetry can only make us better people. And so as we go and we continue this process, no matter what happens, I am sending love, love, love to all of the finalists. We already won. You know, not that this is a competition, but the fact that this is happening still. Big love to Janie Iber for holding down the fort. But the fact that this is happening, it's just really beautiful. So I wanted to leave us my portion on that and say thank you for having me. I'm so honored. I wish we could talk some more. Y'all know I can go all day.
Thank you so much, Paisha.
Thank you.
All right. So I think that concludes it. So Paisha, she will exit gracefully here. We have a few minutes before the next poet will join us for the next interview. I guess, Christine, what are your thoughts here? Should we like black our cameras for a second, or how should we continue? Take a moment for ourselves?
I think you can just take a short recess until 4:40, which is when our next poet will join, and just remind folks that we are asking candidates to be the only ones who are on at the time so that nobody knows the questions ahead of time. and that nobody gets to hear somebody else's interview. So Paisha, if you're able to hop off, that would be wonderful. And yeah, if somebody wants to make a motion to recess until 4:40, and I'll get a second, and then you can do you don't have to do a roll call vote. You can do a voice vote.
Excellent.
I make a motion that we take a recess till 4:40.
I
Second.
second.
All right. By voice,
Just all in
Aye.
favor? Yeah.
all in
Aye.
favor? Excellent. Well,
Um,
thank you. We'll recess until 4:40.
I've got
Oh,
there's some urgent stuff, so I might not be back at 4:40, but I'll keep myself muted and my camera off, but I will come back when I can.
okay. Thank you so much, Connor. All right. All right. Thank you all. We'll be back at 4:40. Welcome back. I think, Christina, do I ask for a motion to return from recess?
Yes.
Can I get a motion to return from recess?
I move to return from recess.
A second.
Okay, all in favor?
I
We are back from recess and with our next candidate, Tracy Stanton. Thank you so much for joining us. Uh, this will be a 30-minute conversation. Each of us will ask questions, if at all possible. Sometimes things come up, and hopefully we'll all be able to participate. But for nothing else, thank you for being here. And I'll get us started with our first question. And as we've seen before, if there's anything that you would like to add, even before you answer a question, feel free. No problem. Okay. So let's begin with a question about your practice as a poet. Tell us about your approach to drafting a poem, including your choice of form and how you know a poem is ready for an audience.
Uh, that first question. Well, first, peace and power, everybody. I hopped on a little bit earlier because I don't know, so I thought it was just like a random thing. So yeah, just I say to Paisha for inviting all of the people into the room. So hello, everybody. Just a little grounding on that. It's funny when I think about oftentimes when the poems come to me, so it's not like I mean, whether I'm walking, whether I'm trying to enjoy my life, whether I'm trying to meditate, whether I'm in the park, whether I'm hiking, whatever, I'm interrupted by the poems, right? And so it's more so like the poem has to be written. There very seldom do I say I'm going to create this space and time to just write, like the writing tells me when it's time to write. So I could get inspired from anything, from a thought, from a word, from a visual, from a memory. And then the poem begins to come. Now, when the poem does come, sometimes I just let it flow without critique, without criticism, without trying to make it be perfect. And then I may go back and edit it. I am a free writer. I don't write in a lot of structures or forms or, ballads or limericks or anything like that. I'm aware of them, but I'm usually just a person that it flows. And so I may do a couple of revisions, and I am a person that likes storytelling, that likes imagery, that likes literary devices. And so over the course of my poetic journey, I have began to write in that way. There was a time where I would have to like go back and put those things in there, like insert those things in there, but now it just flows more freely. And so like I was thinking about a poem I was writing when I was in Bali. One of the poems that I sent you all, that's called Grammatical Error. And so I wrote that whole long, very long poem in one setting and only had to go back and edit it a couple of times. But there may be some times where I have a concept that comes to me with no poem. Now that's when it's time. That's when it's like, oh, these two things can match. I can make a metaphor out of this. Like I can create a whole story of this. Now that's when it's time for me to like, okay, I have this concept. Where am I going to go with it? And sometimes I might have to do research about a topic because I am a believer that poetry is a spiritual thing. So sometimes I get themes and concepts and topics that I don't even know. I don't even know what they're about. I don't know the depth of the thing, but now I need to go research it and see how to bring it into fruition. So sometimes there's research, a lot of times there's editing, sometimes there's no editing, but there's always like shooting it over to some of my folks to get approval. And sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't shoot it over to nobody. I'm like, oh, this feels good with me, right? And I'll go and I may go try it out. And when I try it out, like at an open mic or something like that, and I see what lands, what hits, and then even may have to go back a month later and revise that poem. So that's kind of how the flow goes. And if I'm like commissioned or there's a theme again where someone wants me to write a poem specifically for a thing, then I will definitely do like more research about it if I don't have the internal information already about whatever the subject matter is.
Thank you for that. So I don't know if Connor is back. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Connor's question and we'll proceed from there. How do you plan to use your platform as Poet Laureate to promote poetry and literature? And how might that improve the reputation and well-being of St. Louis and its citizens?
Mm. Well, since I came on the poetry scene, I currently right now have a platform called Some Things Must Be Heard, Spitting and Politicking, where I feature community organizers and spoken word artists that are like, very committed to speaking truth to power and healing to the heart. I also produce several opportunities for people to come into community, to write together, to heal together. And so I envision my role as Poet Laureate being able to explore those in different facets, in different spaces and in different environments. Because one thing that I do know, like, I have been centralized in like the spoken word, open mic spoken word community. I've just over the last year started tapping into like academia community or going out to other open mics in St. Charles and things like that and other places. So I would love to like bridge that gap. That's solely like my main purpose of what I've been focusing on right now, is bridging the intergenerational gap and bringing those artists together in various spaces. So I think that the theme that I had, intertwined, the ties that bind us, I would love to see that, like, explore that in a way where we can really build those bridges. Not too long ago, Paisha and Shiraz and Jason had got us poets together to have like a meet and greet, and we were all able to be in that space. And I think that is something that I want to continue to forge and like grow and develop as well, creating the spaces and the opportunities for us to be in relationship, for us to critique each other's work, for us to also study together. I think that's really important, because what I've noticed is, like, when I came on the poetry scene, which was very not that long ago, right, in 2019, and then COVID came right behind me, and then I came right back after that. Is that a lot of artists in St. Louis don't really know about the rich history of St. Louis poetry. Not even talking about poetry outside of St. Louis, but St. Louis poetry. So that's also something that I would like to bring in, and then share each other's work. So I believe I'm already doing that, not only in the community organizing world with like facilitating biweekly organizing meetings since 2021. That is just the nature of who I am as an individual, to bring people into community, and then also as an artist. So it would just be like an amplification of that, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. And just to make sure, Connor, I went ahead and stole your question and asked it already, so we don't have to go there. Next up, Anne, please.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Tracy. Really appreciate it. This question is a little bit reflective of the one that MK just asked, but what is your vision for your term as St. Louis Poet Laureate?
I really want to get into the cracks and crevices, like the places where, like, that's my thing, right? I'm a grassroots door knocking, go pull up to the people, pull up to the places type of person, as well as type of poet, right? And so I have very, very good reach and a lot of beautiful relationships. So I really want to bring those poetry platforms and those relationships all to the table, right? Like, if I am able to come in to be a poet laureate, I see it as not only me, I see it as a community of people that I'm already in a relationship with, coming in to see, what do you all want to see in the city, right? I'm a listening session type of person. Like, let's get some input, like knowing and understanding what my role is as poet laureate, to expand the reach and to really improve literacy and all of the things, but community at the center of that is going to be my primary focus. And yeah, the cracks and crevices, explore different type of poetic styles, do the historical research, because when I came on the scene, I wanted to know who came before me. But in the open mic scene, which a lot of times the newer artists, that's the only platform that they know to go to. They don't know about your words, or all of the other spaces that, like, folks that have been in the game a long time know about. So how do we bridge those gaps, and then how do we bring people into space where we can do that, like the cross-pollination and the intergenerational relationship building, as well as the critique and the historical context. So I want to get all up in wherever the people ain't at, and bring them to where we at, and also build the relationships that I already have, and bring them into the fold as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Pam?
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here, Tracy.
Good afternoon.
Can you speak to why your body of work makes you the best candidate for Poet Laureate?
Okay. So I'm gonna be real transparent here, right? I believe in transparency. So I had some like self-critique, and self-doubt. And I don't really, I'm a human being, but I had some self-critique and self-doubt because I've only been on the poetry scene since 2019. And because what I know historically around poet laureates is they're very, they have MFAs, or they're like very academic, and that is not my background, right? My background is I was a rapper before I was a poet. I started doing poetry after coming home from incarceration in 2019. And that's when I started doing all of the research and really learning and diving deeper into yeah, I read Maya Angelou and Nikki Giovanni growing up. But when I got into it in 2019, after I came home in 2017, but in 2019, that's when I started really getting deep into it. And so while that was the thing that made me kind of step back, but I got over 15 people that sent this to me was like, you should apply. And so that helped me to move through my own self-critique. And the reason why I believe I'm the best candidate is because I do not come from those backgrounds. And it's because I have the acquired knowledge of the people. Like when I think about June Jordan's fight to show academia that poetry is for the people. So to use African American art and English, right? I believe that I'm able to move through any environment in any space and bring people into poetry as in their humanness, right? And I've been able to do that in a very short amount of time, not only in St. Louis, but literally across the world, including outside of the country, based on my love for poetry, the passion for poetry, but really centering the passion for the people. And that is what provides that's what gives poetry its potency. So I believe I'm the best candidate, not only because I have the skill, the talent, the connections, the relationships. I'm committed. I transitioned out of my job as a full-time organizer in September to fully pursue poetry because that's how much I believe in it, right? After I bought a property, right? So poetry is fueling me in these ways, and that's how committed I am to it. But I'm also a person that has been through life, right? I'm a person that has been through struggles and had extreme joy as well as extreme pain. And so a lot of people that relate to me and follow me and that support me and that keep on coming out to all of the million things that I'm inviting them to, is because of the connection that they feel with me and for me, and that the way that they were introduced to that oftentimes is through my poetry. So that is why I feel like I'm the best candidate for Poet Laureate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Nick?
Thanks for being with us, Tracy. I appreciate your time today. Just a quick question from me. You kind of talked about this as you talked through your vision for your term, but what impact or outcomes do you envision your poetry and the outreach that you mentioned, like creating community, bridging the gaps, having those listening sessions? What are the impact that you see those things having on your audiences?
Yeah, I'm a action. I'm an action type of woman, and I know it. I know and I understand that. We were just at the art of advocacy and artivism and activism. I really would like to see like there being a gap that's bridged between people, organizations, policy changes that are happening in the region, as well as the artists. Like we speak to a lot of those social issues that affect and plague our communities, and oftentimes it kind of stops after we speak. And then we have organizers or community organizing folks that are pushing policy, or even if it's not even within the St. Louis government structure, if it's just in the community, right? So how do we bridge that gap? So I would like to see what are the action items that can be taken to bring this poetry into real life, like action, right? We know this is real life because it's based off our experiences, but how do we collectively do that? And then how do we also build a network that will continue to grow? There's so many different pockets of people that are doing so many different things, and how do we close those gaps? And I would like to see us build those relationships that are more firm and connected. And then also I would love to see a poetry festival, like a poetry conference in St. Louis, within this term. And even some engagements leading up to that conference. And we're able to share our art, same thing, do some studying, do some research, do some collective writing. And it will bring revenue to St. Louis. It will bring the artists out that we don't know about, and be able to build those relationships. But I think primarily is to activate the people, even if it's like taking a more committed stance in your own life or in a community. So it's like you have an issue that you want to write about, or even how do we bring people into poetry, the closet writers, or the people that may have an idea, but they may feel like they don't have the courage to speak that idea. So how do we also use it as a tool for personal healing as well? Lastly, I've had this vision around also youth and elders that are maybe elders that are in senior citizen buildings, or that are in nursing homes, or that don't have that community. Like, how do we also, when I say like the cracks and crevices, how do we get into those spaces to ensure where people are not in community, that they have an opportunity to express their voices as well? So thinking about the things intertwined, the ties that bind us, and then how do we also remember that art is the one thing that transcends everything: race, color, creed, identity. When you feel that, you feel that. And so how do we bring our humanness together, use the art to bring our humanness together, to understand that all of our struggles are intertwined, even if we feel like it doesn't, we can't see it visibly.
Thank you, Nick. And now Kaylin.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. What do you think might be the biggest challenges and opportunities to your term as Poet Laureate?
I think the biggest challenge may be I've never wrote an acrostic poem, right? So, I've wrote limericks, I've wrote ballads. I think the biggest challenge is because I predominantly am sitting in free verse, right? So I'm gonna be open and transparent about that. I'm a very adaptable learner, a very, very brilliant person, if I may say so myself. But I think that may be some of the challenge. But I've been a teaching artist at various places where I've still been able to pull from the information and pull from those poems written before me. So that I may encounter people that been poeting way longer than me and before me, and have like all the historical knowledge and information and wisdom, and they know when this poem was created back in 1800. That's not who I am. You know what I'm saying? I am a person that is committed to the arts, and have been committed to the arts predominantly in the Black arts movement and before. But I can't tell you all of Edgar Allan Poe's poems. I can maybe go through a few. So I think that may be some of the challenges. But I'm a solutions-based person. I'm an adaptable person. I'm a creative, so I have the ability to create things just from my person. And that was the answer to your first part of the question. What was the second part of the question?
And what opportunities do you think could come from your?
Yeah, I think, of course, like not only expanding my reach as a poet, the foundation of why I do poetry, building relationships, putting St. Louis. I have a very, like I said, a platform that that transcends outside of St. Louis. So bringing more artists into the St. Louis poetry scene, also for our artists to learn from, and then also creating opportunities for more people that I may not have connected with in the poetry community as well, building those relationships and being able to develop them. I have like 4 mentees right now. So being able to have a relationship of a pod of people that we can continue to grow and develop with. And then also being the voice for St. Louis's issues, like what is plaguing the people. I think those listening sessions can help us to really hone in on what are the things that St. Louis as a whole, not just each individual person, but what are the common themes that we're facing in our city, and what are the visions that we have. Because that's one thing about being a poet, is that we don't only talk about the struggles, we talk about solutions, and we spark imagination and creativity and vision. So how do we bring that all out as well and use poetry for the tool for that? And then along with, following the legacy of Shirley LaFleur, right? Being able to grow and develop and stretch myself as an artist as well. And I think even when I was talking about what are the potential challenges, like that challenge can even manifest or metabolize into a plus because it'll push me to even stretch myself as an artist. And I think this will urge me or even drive me to learn about the other spaces, to go to Poetry is Life, to go to these other platforms, the Poetry Center and things like that, to find where the artists are, because it's already, I feel like, my role and responsibility. That's why I put my money into projects that create to close intergenerational gaps, but it will even push me even further to build those relationships and really just kind of like provide some synchronicity to the St. Louis poetry community, which I know is one of my many gifts, is to be a connector. And so being Poet Laureate will reinforce that connector spirit that I have as well.
Thank you. And thank you, Kaylin. Christine, about how much time do we have left?
You have 9 minutes and 57 seconds.
So in the remaining time, unless we have a task force member that has a follow-up question, I want to give you the floor, Tracy, to offer any concluding thoughts.
Yeah. I know that when I think, and I put this on my application too, I think that being a legacy keeper, a memory keeper, an artist is important. I think that also being in a space where, traditionally we may have considered what are different qualifications or standards for this role. I just want you all to encourage you all to not just look at what the standard is, but look at what the potential impact can be. And when you put someone in a place, because I'm gonna be transparent about this as well, right? I'm formerly incarcerated. I have experienced life and I've came on the other side of that, right? And so what does it look like for us to really be creative about the people that we put into this space? And then what does that say for our, like us as a city, us as a people? And yeah, any task and role and thing that I put my life and my heart and my spirit into, I do it with everything in me, and I do it with passion and purpose. And poetry is not an additive for me. It's not something that I can try to squeeze into, my life. It is literally the center of everything that I do. And so that's why I set up my life in the ways in which in the last couple of years that I'm able to do that and pursue it to its full capacity. And my deep, deep, deep love for St. Louis and what I know the creative communities can be, and not only just the creative community, but the community at large could be. I believe that this role can be a part of the catalyst to that vision of being intertwined and closing those gaps and really understanding that the ties that bind us together are really stronger than those that tear us apart. And so, yeah, those are my closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
We
you.
do appreciate it. So we have one more candidate that we're going to meet with, and you'll hear from us soon enough. Okay, Tracy. So again,
Okay.
thank you for the application. Thank you for being a part of it. And you can feel free to exit this space, but you can continue to stream and watch or whatever the case may be. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you all.
Right. So we have one more candidate, and this will be at 5:10 today. So let's recess. Can I get a motion to recess?
Move to recess until 5:10.
Mm-hmm.
A second.
Okay. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. All right. So we'll return at 5:10. Thank you very much.
Kaylin, where are you with all those banker boxes? It's making me nervous. There's a lot of documentation there.
I volunteer at this office, so I'm just like in the back.
Okay.
Christine, it doesn't look like you're at City Hall, but there is currently someone blasting techno music
Oh,
out
that's
front, and we cannot. No, it's not fun. We cannot identify a source.
seriously?
I can't. I mean, I cannot figure out where it's coming from. It's driving me nuts. Sorry, I got to take this.
That's maybe one of the weirdest problems I've ever heard about at City Hall.
Oh boy. All right. So, hello. We'll begin in just a second.
Okay, no problem.
So we'll come back. I suppose we've already started to come back from recess, but let me, I guess officially, get a motion to return from recess.
I move to return from recess.
A second.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. So thank you all for coming back, and thank you for joining us today. I'm excited that we've been able to get such fine candidates for the poet laureate, and we welcome you to this chat, this conversation. This will go for about 30 minutes. The previous two had an opportunity to offer a final thought. You will have an opportunity as well, I assume, depending on how things go. But each of us will ask a question and we'll just kind of roll from there.
Sure.
I'll begin by asking you something that's about poetry. Specifically, tell us about your approach to drafting a poem, including your choice of form and how you know a poem is ready for an audience.
A great question. I think it's various, to be honest, but I think there are different times. As I wrote in my statement, I feel like poetry is kind of this moment that doesn't quite settle for me, right? So when I'm in some kind of situation, it doesn't have to be anything dramatic, but I can just feel some tension in it, right? The other day, my husband was cutting pieces off of a plant that had been given to me when my mother passed away, and we were going to propagate it, right? And there was something about that word propagation that struck me because she had died of cancer. And so I started thinking of cancer cells. So I don't have a poem about this yet, but that's one of those moments where I'm just sort of like, this feels like a poem. And sometimes that will just kind of launch itself. Other times, I will go to a museum and some piece of art will grab me. Sometimes it's something out of history that I'll pick up. So subject wise, it's quite various, but almost always there's some sort of tension in that moment that I'm interested in exploring. Formally, I am interested in I'm really interested in the page, right? So I like to see. I don't always, use the full page like that, but typically I will try to be thinking about space on the page and how the kind of blank space is also functioning. So sort of moments of respite or reflection within the poem. So I'm really interested in that. I do like formal poetry, though I don't think I sent you any, because I don't write it very often, but I like the constraints of formal poetry that sort of you can be more creative when you know that you're kind of boxed in a specific way, and I like that challenge. So those are the forms I think. When I know a poem is ready for a public audience is hard because there have been times when I've shared a poem and I got the feedback that this was the greatest thing I've ever written, and I didn't think so. Right. But I think what helps me is I will let a poem sit for a while. I'll, save it in my computer and then I come back, and look at it again and think, one of the things I do with that is try to think about the poem as if I often use my mother for this, but I'll think of other people as well. If my mom were reading this, how would this be experienced? If, my students were reading this, how would it be experienced? So I try on different audiences a little bit and imagine them hearing it. And that helps me, I think, clarify where I'm being, a little pretentious or a little complicated and I don't need to be, or where I'm explaining too much or explaining too little, right? So those kinds of things are what I do, I think. And I just over spring break just went away and was able to have a little retreat. And I just brought a bunch of old poems that weren't very ready and worked a lot on those. So that revision process is really important to me.
Thank you. You know, I neglected to ask you. So it's Corinne, right?
Yeah, actually, it's a good question. I was named after the Bob Dylan song Corina Corina, so my mother
Okay.
always said Corrine, but no one else does, and so I call myself Corinne now, but I'm never offended if you say Corrine. The only thing I don't like is Connie because people get that name wrong a lot. So yeah, either one is really fine.
No Connie's for me. All right,
No
next
Connie,
up.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Connor.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here. So, the poet laureate is a civic position.
Yeah,
Is a position that is meant to promote and enhance the city. And
yeah.
so, how if you were to be selected, how would you use your platform as the poet laureate to promote poetry and literature, and in a way that helps to enhance the reputation and well-being of the city and its
Yeah.
residents?
Yeah, that's part of what really excites me about this is the intersection of poetry with the city, right? I moved here in 1998 to attend WashU. I plan to stay here for 2 years, study poetry, stay in my little ivy tower up there at WashU. And here I am 20 something, 27 years later, I think it is, really fallen in love with this city. I'm, as I said before, those moments where there's tension, where you can feel this energy, this uh possibility, I guess I would say, in a moment that could also become something that is not good, right? Like I see that in St. Louis. I see this kind of, I'm aware of its history. I'm aware of its current struggles and divides and divisions, but I'm also really fascinated by the cultural hybridity that forms in those kinds of spaces and the creativity that comes out of those kinds of spaces. And so that energy really motivates me. What I would do for the city, I mean, I think there are quite a lot of things I could think of, right? One of the things I've done a fair amount of with various groups is taking people to various sites and doing interpretations and projects on site. So I like the idea of almost like visiting places that we don't think of as, I probably wouldn't take people to the Arch, right? But maybe, a building that we didn't, that, has a history that not a lot of people know about or something like that, right? Um, I would love to just, I mean, I don't want to blend too many questions all in once, but I love the idea of doing events for poetry that don't just exist in one neighborhood or not just sort of in the, central locations, but really going around to smaller venues around different parts of the city so that people are invited and hosting one another and then, bringing that, inviting people the other direction later on. So I think, there are just a lot of ways I feel like I feel like I really have a story of my own that is about uh finding time and finding place for poetry where it is not always easy. And that's what excites me, is to find ways that St. Louisans can find time and can find an appreciation for where they live um on paper, you know, um in spoken word and in just different ways. So I don't know. I feel like I'm blending 100 different questions there, but that's the excitement for me, is that St. Louis and poetry to me have a shared core of like potential creativity that we can explore, right? And also be real about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was very, very helpful. I believe Anne has the next question.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks, Corinne, for being here today.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. And this question really kind of builds on the question that Connor just posed. What is your vision, should you be selected, for your term as St. Louis Poet Laureate?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I need to learn a little bit more about is what the resources are and what the platforms typically have been so that I could work within that. But I really, as I mentioned in my application, really like the idea of something like a residency, right? So I am a member of 2 writers' colonies, and I don't get to go as often as I'd like, but we can just go there, and they're in kind of scenic places, and they're peaceful and quiet, and you just write all day, and in the evening you come together for a meal with other writers, and you're able to talk about your work. And I find it just really, really wonderful for me, right? To be able to have both space that's just for writing, and then also the community that helps me process it, think about it, and I help them do the same. But those are very privileged things to be able to do. Most people can't do something like that. And so I'm thinking of something that I did. I've done this a few summers now. I call it Wednesday work days, where I just announce to a group of friends, and it's always open to other people as well, that I'm going to be sitting at this coffee shop, and I intentionally don't go to the same one all the time. And I say, I'll be there from 10 to 3 on Wednesday. If you want to come by and work together, come by. And I really love this because it's an opportunity for people to be completely casual, writing together without any sort of expectations or pressure, right? Any sort of, you must produce X, Y, or Z. So I could envision different ways we do that kind of space where we share writing together. Maybe in some cases we would want to do some exercises to like prompt people, or to work in different parts of the city. Like I said, going to different sites. I like that idea. I've also always wanted to do a poetry workshop that's intergenerational. I have never done that, but I think it would be really interesting for older people and younger people to be writing together. I think that I haven't been able to find much online presence for the Poet Laureate. So I think if possible, I'd love to increase maybe some of the social media, or maybe its own platform, just to share and highlight St. Louis poets. I don't know what all resources are available for this, but I could even imagine doing something like a St. Louis journal, maybe an online journal that features community submissions. One thing that's kind of interesting about the writing programs here in St. Louis is that neither WashU nor SLU has a literary magazine as such. So we could try something along those lines, perhaps, right? Again, I'm not quite sure what is all available. I know that you work in schools. It's a little known fact about me. I started off as an elementary education major, so I like working with children. I've worked with them, and I used to teach at an aftercare program at the Clayton schools. And I remember taking kindergartners to the botanical gardens to write haiku in the Japanese garden, right? So I love stuff like that, just getting people out into the city, I am so sorry, my cat is really trying to join this discussion. Um, he hasn't talked to me all day, but now he's here. Uh, yeah, just finding destinations, moving around, and trying to help people just find space, low pressure space. Sometimes when you hear even the word poet laureate, to me sounds so, sort of highbrow and fancy, but I think that's not the point, right? The point is for people to feel comfortable, to feel welcome, that poetry doesn't feel exclusive to certain kinds of people, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Pam?
Good afternoon. Thank you for
Pam.
could you speak to us a bit about why your body of work makes you the best candidate for Poet Laureate?
The specific poems, you mean? Or do
It
you
doesn't
mean
have
like,
to just be the poems that
okay,
you
yeah,
submitted. It could be those,
yeah.
you could touch on those, but you can also talk about poems beyond that.
Yeah, sure. I think that the kinds of poems I write are I sort of don't like the word accessible, because sometimes people associate that with easy, right? I'm not trying to be difficult in my poems, but I think my poems are something that people can understand. You don't have to get out a dictionary. You don't have to, I mean, and they might not understand them as a thesis that they could just perfectly reproduce, but they experience them. And so that kind of, I think, relatability is something that is important if you're going to try to bring people into poetry. If you're sending out poems that are, just mystifying people, that's not an invitation, right? That's a a barrier in some kinds of ways. So, but then, I mean, just to add to that, I've been teaching since 1999 across St. Louis. I taught first at WashU. I still teach at WashU sometimes. I worked for 23 years at Fontbonne University, which is a very, local university where I really got to know students from around this region. Now I'm at St. Louis University. And in all of those positions, especially at Fontbonne and now at SLU, I've really been, I've been an administrator quite a bit. So as well as like kind of teaching, not just creative writing, but history, culture studies. I'm kind of the interdisciplinary like I'm the champion of making connections across weird weird ways. But I've organized conferences, I've organized, field trips, I've organized readings, panel discussions. I'm a really creative person in terms of in terms of structuring it and building ideas. That kind of build culture. So I'm kind of proud of that. Like I've just come in as a new chair to Women's and Gender Studies at St. Louis University. This is my first year. And they were in a lot of disarray, and just kind of finding a structure, kind of finding a way to build up the culture so that our students feel like they know us, our students feel like they can approach us, that we can talk during these difficult times when students have a lot of questions about what's going on in the world. And so that kind of experience, just relating to people in multiple venues, and it's not just, I really want to be clear, this is not just academic, right? I've done a lot of work down at like the Ulysses S. Grant House, doing on-site work with students there, talking about public interpretation. So I'm working now with the Missouri History Museum on a major exhibit that will be out in 2029 on immigration that focuses specifically on St. Louis. So no matter what I'm doing, whether it's history, whether it's writing, I'm always really interested in the public humanities piece of it. I've been put on a couple of committees that are starting different programs at SLU already, focusing on this kind of outreach and community engagement. So for me, why do this stuff if it's only ever read in an academic journal or some obscure place? It really is about taking the humanities fields, taking writing, taking literature, taking art into the world. I think that's where we need it, and that's what matters. So that's kind of my approach. I can probably go into detail about a lot of different things I've done, but I'll spare you that for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Nick.
Thank you for being here, Corinne. I appreciate your
Yeah, thank
time.
you.
So you mentioned this a little bit, and when you talked about your vision for your term and some of the things that you'd like to do, such as heightening the social media presence, maybe a literary magazine. Sorry, my animal is
Good, that makes me feel better.
except he's 100 pounds. So,
okay.
but what impact or outcomes do you envision your poetry and the outreach efforts having on your audiences in St. Louis?
I think it's twofold, right? So I feel very connected to the idea of the individual just feeling transformation there, right? Like that the individual feels some sort of empowerment, that the words they put down, whether it's I'm going to say on paper because that's how my work functions, but spoken word is, just as important, is valid, is worth hearing. And also then to kind of push them, sometimes you have students, I've had students who write a poem and then it's like, don't ever touch this. This is my personal feeling. We can never audit this, right? But to help them move toward craft, how can you take that poem and those sentiments that you have and make it even more powerful, relatable, surprising to the audience, right? So I want to have that individual sort of empowerment, for lack of a better word, unlocking people's creativity and their self-confidence, because I think we really, like I said in my statement, we've really struggled to find space for this stuff in our everyday lives, and it's harder and harder to find these kinds of places to express oneself. So that's the individual. And then, my hope is for the community, right? That by kind of hearing each other's stories, hearing each other's poetry, meeting in each other's spaces, right? I think that is so important. I mean, this city is so segregated. So to have the opportunity to realize that there's art going on and there are these exciting people and interesting thoughts and communities happening that are not in your own little community, is very important to me. And I think that's something that we, that poetry can bridge, right? People want to support one another when they're doing this kind of work. So for me, that kind of community building is an outcome I would hope for as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kaylin?
Hi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What do you think might be the biggest challenges and opportunities to your term as poet laureate?
That is a good question. And also I'm so intrigued by where you are. All those boxes behind you look very, very exciting. Challenges, I think just to begin with, I don't know what budgets look like. I don't know what opportunities or things you have. I know that this is that it's not something you probably have a ton of money for. And so part of it is just the creativity of figuring out how can we work on a shoestring if we need to? And that's something I'm very familiar with, especially unfortunately having worked at an institution that is now closing because of finances. And the humanities were never a top priority. So I'm really good at kind of figuring out how can we do this without a whole lot of resources, right? That kind of thing. So that's one thing and that's just something I need to know about. What do you all want? What do you all hope for? Right. So I think it's really important for me not to just come in and say, this is what we're going to do, but instead like, what is this task force looking for? What are other people looking for? So I think that's a challenge, but like kind of an exciting challenge. And the opportunity is just finding those answers, right? And then trying to do those things with people. And legitimately, as I said in my statement, I want to do this for the city. I want to do this for other people, but I want to do this for myself as well. This kind of community is something that I kind of used to have a long time ago, and periodically have had in different forms throughout the years. But I was raising children. I was, trying to build up a career. I didn't have the luxury after getting a Master of Fine Arts degree to not have health care. So always having to work was really important to me. So these are the things I think that I have in common with just like a lot of people, right? They might care about writing. They maybe used to do it. They always wish to get back to it. And so I think this this opportunity gives that, I hope, to others as well as to myself, right? I think it's a very sincere wish that I'm hoping for, right? I think I'm not alone in needing. So I hope that answers it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Christine, this is a quick time check. About how much time do we have left?
9 minutes and 24 seconds.
Well, Corinne, if you would, as I mentioned before, this is an opportunity for you to maybe impart a final thought. Les task force members, if you have another question that you might want to ask, gonna hold for a moment. If not, then Corinne, the floor is yours
Yeah.
for a final thought.
Anybody? All right, I'll launch in then. So I actually went to a workshop on Thursday morning at SLU, and it was about how to use AI in digital humanities. And I'm a pretty big AI skeptic, I'll be straight up about that. But I went with an open mind. And one of the things that I found really interesting in this presentation, it really excited me, was a discussion about what AI can do that was, it's pretty convincing. There are some neat things that it can do that could be useful in the humanities, being able to sort a whole lot of data and produce new insights. But what we really got into talking about was the space needed for the human, right? As we become just increasingly a culture of productivity, of doing more, of other, machines writing for us, of everything being about the bottom line, right? we're tired, we're stressed, and what we're missing is that real space for creativity. And I really do think I was quite energized thinking about this on Thursday, that poetry is one of the only spaces, AI can't do good poetry. Let's put it that way, right? It can't represent human experience. And nothing is more important than that, right? And we need to be able to connect to each other through human experience and we're losing a lot of our places that we've been able to do that in the past, I think. It's never been perfect in the past, but we've always needed it, but maybe we need it even more right now in this kind of very polarized time. And a time when people are just trying to get by and poetry seems like a kind of silly thing to focus on, right? I want to convince people that that's not the case. So that kind of different way of knowing, different way of experiencing the world is something that, like I said, I am seeking. I've had it, but I've had it. I came back to poetry pretty heavily right after my mother died. I was writing in isolation, really by myself. It was exhilarating to be writing, and it's kind of that. I forget what the movie was, but the actress who got that award one time and said, "Oh, you really liked me." Like I was surprised that I was still getting things published after it had been a while, and I was like, so that felt good, but I didn't, what I lacked that I had before when I was in school and when I was younger was just the sense of other people around me doing this. I didn't have anybody to read my stuff. I didn't have anybody to think with, or to be challenged by, or to be introduced to new things by. So that's my vision, right? I mean, I'm kind of taking what I feel like I need and thinking that, I'm pretty confident I'm not the only person in this boat, in one way or the other. And so I'm kind of hoping that that would be an invitation that's relatable to other people, that they say they can see themselves a little bit in this, in my story, or in the offerings that we give, so that I'm not coming off as some, ivory tower university professor who, wears this laureate crown in a big-headed way. Does that make sense? But I hope I'm somebody that people can understand, and I know I'm a good teacher. I know I'm a good presenter. I know I'm good at organizing these things. And so my confidence in those areas, I think will really be able to help other people do the same kinds of things I'm looking to do.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
There,
thank you.
it's been a delight to speak with you, and
Yeah.
we will close out our experience today, and then we'll get back with you with the decision, one way or another. So thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm really excited about this. I
Thanks.
appreciate you all. Okay, good night.
All right, good night.
Thank you.
My cat doesn't want to leave.
No, that's how it works. All right, so we have our work cut out for us. So as noted before, through Christine, go ahead and score your rubrics and submit that to Christine. I want to add one more layer to it, if I may have this little point of privilege. If you could not only offer your point totals in the rubric form, but also just a general ranking of the poets, as you understand. So it could be both. I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding, because sometimes as we try to quantify, things get missed. And I want to make sure that we have that. We have on the books a follow-up meeting on April 7th, but you will communicate with Christine via email now, or nowish. And the good news is that this is recorded, right? So if you want to go back and before you offer your final scores, you can go back to that portion of the interview, and we can kind of go from there. Pam, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly ask, I just want to make sure that I'm, I'm on the right page here. So fill out one of the rubrics for each person that we interviewed. And in addition, when I send that to Christina, just have a 1, 2, 3 ranking.
Yeah, and the only reason why is so that it corresponds, right? Like these are two data points, if you will. And we're offering these two data points. But I wonder sometimes if when we are scoring, is our scoring married to how we actually feel, like in terms of an ordinal rank, right? I don't know if it does correspond that way. So I want to make sure that we are on the same page. And if for no other reason, not to say that we would necessarily use that ranking, but I think it's important that your scores align with how you're feeling and how you're thinking about the candidates. Does that make sense?
No, it makes complete sense because right now, the way the rubric is worded and scored, everything is equal weight.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably each of us might feel that certain things in the rubric are more important to us, or just we're so strong with an individual candidate that we start to weigh them more or see how they could be very useful for the position. So, but I just wanted to make sure I was understanding clearly what we were doing. I mean, if I find that my ranking isn't the same as my score, I will probably send something in that email to Christina explaining why I think that way.
I think that's fair. And then again, we'll have an opportunity to discuss this in our follow-up meeting should we need to. Again, what we're coming to is a recommendation. Christine, you have your hand up, and then Connor. Oh, Christine, you're on mute.
I know how this works. Thank you. Just wanted to be clear that you guys are going to be scoring the questions that you asked tonight versus the original rubric. So like 5 points per question for 6 questions that were asked.
Sure. That's fair. I think that's fair. That way it can be closely tied to it. I thank you for that clarification. I think that's fair. Is that fine with everybody if we can just kind of score how we felt they answered each question? Yeah? Okay.
Yes. Do we have any kind of like document for that, or just create our own Word document?
I think if you could just use, if it's possible to just use the document that MK sent
Got
today.
it.
Yeah, and if you're able to, obviously it's not required, but if you're able to get it to me, like even if it's as late as like Saturday night, just to give me a little more time than like Monday when I have other meetings going on. And then I do think it makes sense. We had talked last week about the possibility of maybe not having a meeting Monday because Monday is very crazy for people. But even if we're able to meet for 15 minutes to just figure out like, if I can get the information, I guess what I'm saying by Saturday night at the latest, the earlier I have the information, the better, and I can report back out to everyone on the task force. And then we can make some decisions via email, maybe just be able to convene on the 7th quickly.
Yep. So just to kind of add to that, we may be able to get most of this work done via email. I feel like we will. Is likely, especially if the scores show a strong recommendation from all of us, right? So let's see what we have. We know that we have the 7th as a backup, but let's plan to get this thing done via email if that's okay, unless we need to have conversation. But otherwise, let's try to get it done via email. Connor, you had your hand up.
Christine answered my question.
Yeah, no, it's a crazy time, and I'm really mindful of that. And my hope is that we can conduct and conclude our business via email, if that's okay.
I do think, I hate to be a stickler for the rules, but if we could
Sure.
even just have one motion to put nomination on the 7th, like I said, it could be like a 5, 10, 15-minute meeting if we can get the behind the scenes work done before then. And then on the 7th, just have one motion to move a candidate forward if that's what,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's what the task
You're
force
right.
chooses
You're
to
right.
do.
So then if that's the case, then let us then plan to just have our meeting so that we can put forth the recommendation. Yeah. And so just to be clear, again, we do not select the poet laureate. We recommend it for the Board of Aldermen to put that to a vote. Okay, just to be clear. All right. So is that all we need to do with that, Christine? Just to make sure that we're on top of the rule. Okay, good. All right. Any other questions or comments before we conclude our business today? I think we all know what we need to do, right? It's been a pleasure All of you have been so fantastic. I know this isn't our final meeting, but I appreciate the thoughtfulness, the time, the effort, the sacrifice that went into your service. And of course, the work of the task force will continue even after the recommendation. But this is truly novel. We hadn't done this before, even though we've had wonderful chairs in the form of Aaron Williams and Cheryl Walker. We had not done this before. And again, I want to acknowledge the work of Christine for facilitating this to ensure that this is happening. This is transparent. I think everybody who had a question about who our candidates are, they got a chance to bear witness for themselves. And hopefully the people who are watching this will be of a similar mind as this particular body as to who the next poet laureate should be for the city of St. Louis. All right. With that said, can I get a motion to adjourn our meeting?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you so much. We'll come back together on the 7th. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, MK.
Thank you. Bye.